Kicked out at 16, an orphan inherits a dusty apothecary. What she found inside would change everything. If you've ever felt like the world has forgotten you, or if you're just looking for a story that proves second chances are real, hit that subscribe button and stick with me. This story is for you. The world ended and began on a Tuesday, my 18th birthday. It wasn't the kind of ending you see in movies, with fire and explosions. It was quiet. It was the sound of a vinyl seat cushion sighing under my weight on a cross-country bus, the hiss of the air brakes, and the final hollow click of a door shutting behind me at the group home. 2 years I'd spent there. 2 years of counting down the days until I was officially no one's problem. Freedom, they called it. It felt more like being pushed off a cliff in the dark. In my pocket, I had $74 and a folded piece of paper with an address. In my hand, I clutched a single ornate iron key, its teeth worn smooth with time. It felt cold and heavy, like a secret I was forced to keep. My last meeting with Mrs. Albright, my caseworker, had been as sterile as the room it took place in. Beige walls, a dying plant in the corner, a clock on the wall whose ticking seemed to be mocking me. "Elara," she'd said, not looking up from her paperwork. Her voice was flat, practiced. "As you know, upon your 18th birthday, you are officially aged out of the state's care." She slid a thick manila envelope across the metal desk. It made a scratching sound that set my teeth on edge. "Your birth certificate, social security card, the standard documents. And this." She tapped a smaller, ridiculously formal-looking envelope made of thick, cream-colored paper. "It arrived last week from a law office in a town called Havenwood. Apparently, your great-aunt, Isolde Vance, passed away. She was your last known relative. She left you something." I stared at the envelope. Isolde. A name like a ghost, a whisper from a life I barely remembered. I had a single faded memory of her, the scent of lavender and damp earth, the glint of light off 100 tiny glass bottles, and a low, humming voice that felt like safety. Then, nothing. The official story was that she had surrendered me to the state when I was 6, abandoned me. For 12 years, that fact had been the foundation of my life, the bedrock of my anger and my loneliness. "She left me something?" I repeated, the words tasting like ash. "A property," Mrs. Albright clarified, finally looking at me over the rim of her glasses. Her expression was one of mild inconvenience. "The deed is in there, along with a letter from her lawyer. There are complications. Back taxes, I believe. The state has no obligation to assist you with this. It's your inheritance, your problem." My problem. I took the envelopes. Inside the smaller one was the key and a short, typed letter from a Mr. Abernathy, requesting I come to his office in Havenwood to discuss the estate of the late Isolde Vance. It also mentioned a standing offer on the property from a corporate entity. He advised me to consider it seriously. I spent my last night in a room with 3 other girls, none of whom looked at me, and in the morning I walked out the door without a single goodbye. The bus ticket to Havenwood used up nearly half of my $74. As the city dissolved into suburbs, then into sprawling farmland, I leaned my head against the vibrating window and felt nothing. Not excitement, not sadness, just a profound, hollow emptiness. A ghost going to claim a ghost's house. I didn't know then that the house wasn't empty. It was waiting. It was full of answers to questions I hadn't even known how to ask. It held a truth that would either shatter me completely or finally teach me how to be whole. The key in my hand grew warmer, or maybe it was just my own body heat, a small spark of life against the cold, dead metal. The bus groaned into Havenwood hours later, pulling up to a curb on a main street that looked like a half-forgotten photograph. The town was nestled in a valley, cupped between green hills that were slowly being consumed by an evening fog. The buildings were old, brick and stone, with faded paint and proud, tired faces. It was the kind of place that time had decided to flow around rather than through. There was a diner with a flickering neon sign, a hardware store with a wooden screen door, and a single, sad-looking gas station. I stepped off the bus, and the air was different. It was clean and sharp, smelling of pine and damp soil, and something else. Something faintly sweet and spicy, like cinnamon and rain. My thin jacket was useless against the sudden chill. I pulled it tighter, my duffel bag slung over my shoulder, and looked at the address on the paper one more time. 117 Blackbird Lane. I found it just off the main street, a narrow, two-story building squeezed between a bookstore and a small bakery. It was exactly as the lawyer's letterhead had described it. Vance's Apothecary. The name was painted in elegant, faded gold letters on the large picture window. The window itself was so coated in dust it was nearly opaque, but I could just make out the dark shapes of shelves and bottles inside. The paint on the dark green door was peeling, the brass doorknob tarnished to a dull brown. Above the shop, 2 windows on the second floor stared out like vacant eyes. It looked less like a building and more like a tomb, a monument to being forgotten. This was my inheritance, a pile of bricks and dust and debt. A wave of bitterness washed over me, so sharp it almost made me gag. This is what she left me? Not a home, not a family, but a ruin. I checked the time. Mr. Abernathy's office didn't open until the next morning. I had $12 left. Not enough for a motel room, not that I could see one anyway. It was either the street or the tomb. I walked up the 3 stone steps, the iron key feeling heavy and alien in my palm. My hand was shaking as I pushed it into the lock. It resisted, gritty with rust and disuse. For a second I thought it wouldn't turn, that I would be locked out, and the absurdity of it all, the final cosmic joke, made a hysterical laugh bubble up in my throat. Then, with a groan of protest and a loud, definitive clunk, the lock turned. The sound echoed in the quiet street. I pushed the door open. It swung inward on complaining hinges, releasing a breath of air that was ancient and thick. It was the smell I remembered, the one from that single, hazy memory. Lavender, yes, and damp earth, but also chamomile and mint, clove and dried roses, old paper and beeswax, and something else, something wild and green and deeply alive. I stepped across the threshold, out of the fading light and into the shadows of my past, and pulled the heavy door shut behind me. The sound it made was final, a full stop, the end of one sentence and the beginning of another I couldn't yet read. The darkness inside was almost total, thick and velvety. The only light came from the grimy front window, casting a pale, milky rectangle onto the dusty floorboards. I stood just inside the door, my duffel bag a dead weight at my feet, and let my eyes adjust. Slowly, shapes emerged from the gloom. A long wooden counter ran the length of the room, its surface invisible under a blanket of dust. Behind it, shelves climbed all the way to the high, pressed tin ceiling, crammed with hundreds, maybe thousands of glass bottles and ceramic jars. They were amber, cobalt blue, forest green, each one a tiny world of its own. Faded, handwritten labels clung to them, the calligraphy elegant and spidery. I could just make out a few words: valerian root, yarrow, motherwort, feverfew. It was a library of sleeping plants. My fingers, searching the wall by the door, found a light switch. It was an old-fashioned toggle switch. I flicked it up. Nothing. I flicked it down and up again. Still nothing. The power was off. Of course it was. I fumbled in my bag for the small, cheap flashlight I'd bought at a dollar store. The beam cut a shaky, narrow cone through the darkness, illuminating a universe of dust motes dancing in the still air. I swept the light across the room. Everything was coated in the same soft, gray layer of time. A set of brass scales sat on the counter, shrouded in cobwebs. A heavy mortar and pestle, made of dark, veined marble, seemed to be waiting for a hand to pick it up. Stacks of yellowed books and journals were piled in a corner, their spines cracked and their pages warped. It felt like a place where someone had simply vanished mid-task, leaving everything to slowly, quietly fall asleep. There was a profound stillness to the room, a silence that felt heavier than mere quiet. It was the silence of absence. I ran a finger along the wooden counter, cutting a clean, dark line through the dust. This was her world, Isolde's, the woman who had given me away. Walking through the shop felt like trespassing. I moved slowly, my footsteps unnaturally loud on the creaking floorboards. Behind the counter, I found a small, pot-bellied stove, cold and dark, and a door that led to a back room. It was a storage and work area, even more cluttered than the main shop. Sacks of dried herbs leaned against the walls, their burlap sides stamped with exotic-sounding names. Bunches of plants hung upside down from the rafters, brittle and brown, rustling like paper ghosts whenever I moved. There was a large workbench covered in glass beakers, distillation coils, and more books. It was a place of work, of creation. It smelled even stronger back here, a complex perfume of soil and spice and decay. I felt a strange mix of resentment and a powerful, unwanted curiosity. Who was this woman? What had she done in this strange, silent place? My narrative of her was simple. She was the villain of my story, the one who didn't want me. But the room I was standing in didn't feel like a villain's lair. It felt dedicated, peaceful. I went back to the main shop, shining my light on the shelves. One section held not just herbs, but small handcrafted items. Beeswax candles, bars of soap wrapped in brown paper and string, and small cloth sachets tied with ribbon. It was a place of healing. How could a person who healed others be so willing to wound a child, her own family? The contradiction was a knot in my chest. My stomach rumbled, a stark reminder of my reality. I was tired, hungry, and standing in a dead woman's dusty legacy with no power and $12. I wasn't here for answers. I was here to meet a lawyer, sign some papers, and hopefully walk away with enough money to not be homeless. That was the plan. Sell it all. Let the corporation bulldoze it. Why should I care? I returned to the front counter, leaning against it, the flashlight beam aimed at the floor. It was then that I saw it. Under the counter, tucked away on a small shelf, was a metal cash box. It was old and black, with a simple latch. It wasn't even locked. My heart started to beat a little faster. With trembling fingers, I lifted it out and placed it on the counter, wiping the dust away with my sleeve. I lifted the latch. Inside, nestled on red felt, was a stack of cash. Not a fortune, but it wasn't nothing. I counted it under the flashlight beam. $340. Enough for food. Enough to turn the power on. Enough to breathe for a week or two. And underneath the money was something else. Another key. This one was smaller, simpler, and attached to a leather tag with a single word burned into it. Home. There had to be a way upstairs. I found the door in the back of the shop, half hidden behind a heavy curtain. It was unlocked. A narrow, steep staircase led up into darkness. Using the flashlight, I climbed, each step groaning under my weight. The air grew warmer, less thick with the scent of herbs, and more with the simple human smell of a place where someone had lived. The key slid easily into the lock on the door at the top of the stairs. It opened into a small apartment, a living room, a tiny kitchen, a bedroom, a bathroom. And it was perfect. Not perfect in a magazine sense, but perfectly preserved. It was as if Isolde had just stepped out for a walk. A thick, hand-knitted afghan was folded over the back of a comfortable-looking armchair. A book lay face down on the small table beside it, its page marked. In the kitchen, a mug sat in the drying rack by the sink. Unlike the shop below, the apartment was clean. Not sterile, but cared for. The dust was minimal. Someone had been keeping it up. Perhaps Mr. Abernathy. I walked into the bedroom. A simple quilt was spread neatly on a four-poster bed. On the wall hung a few framed pressings of flowers and ferns. And on the bedside table, a framed photograph. I picked it up. It showed a woman with kind, tired eyes and long gray hair tied back in a loose braid. She was smiling, but it was a sad smile. She was standing in front of the apothecary, her hands shoved into the pockets of a large cardigan. It was her, Isolde. Beside her, holding her hand, was a little girl with big, serious eyes and two dark pigtails. Me. I stared at the picture, at the ghost of a girl I could barely remember being, and felt a crack appear in the icy wall I had built around my heart. I had been happy here. I could see it in the way I was leaning into her, the way my small hand was gripping hers. We looked like we belonged together. So what happened? What broke this picture? I put the photo down, my hand shaking again. My gaze fell on a small, dark wood writing desk in the corner of the room. It was the only thing that seemed out of place. It was locked. There was no key. I tried the drawers, but they were all secured. A sudden, fierce conviction seized me. The answers were in there. I had to get inside. I went back to the kitchen and found a butter knife in a drawer. It was clumsy, but I was determined. I wedged the tip of the knife into the seam of the main roll top and pried. The old wood groaned and splintered. I didn't care. I felt a savage satisfaction with each crack. Finally, with a loud snap, the lock gave way. I rolled back the top. The desk was neat, organized. Cubby holes filled with envelopes, pens, a pot of dried ink. And in the very center, placed as if waiting for me, was a thick, heavy envelope made of cream-colored paper. My name was written on the front, in that same elegant, spattery script from the jars downstairs. Ilara. My breath caught in my throat. I sat down in the chair, my legs suddenly weak. The air in the room felt heavy, charged with the weight of 12 silent years. I picked up the envelope. The paper was thick and soft. I turned it over. It was sealed with a drop of dark red wax, impressed with the image of a single lavender sprig. For a long time, I just sat there, holding it. It was a message from the dead, a justification, an apology, an accusation. I didn't know which was worse. I was afraid to open it, afraid of the words inside, afraid of what they would do to the simple, angry story I had told myself for so long. But I was more afraid of not knowing. With a deep, shaky breath, I broke the seal. Inside were several pages filled with that same beautiful, terrifying handwriting. I unfolded the first page and began to read. "My dearest Ilara," it began. The words seemed to lift off the page, spoken in a voice I could almost remember. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and the world has failed to keep you from this place as I had hoped. I am sorry. I am sorry for so many things, but please, believe me when I say I am not sorry that I loved you. My love for you is the one true and uncomplicated thing in my life. I know you must hate me. I know you believe I abandoned you. The state, the official version of the story, would have told you as much. It is a simple, clean narrative. It is also a lie." I had to stop reading. My eyes were burning. I squeezed them shut, but the words were seared into my mind. It is also a lie. I took a ragged breath and forced myself to continue, my knuckles white as I gripped the paper. "I did not give you up, my love. I sent you away. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, a choice that broke my own heart every single day since. But I had no other way to protect you. You see, this little shop, this legacy from my grandmother, is more than it appears. We were healers, Ilara, not just of coughs and fevers, but of the deeper ailments the world of modern medicine often dismisses. We worked with the earth, with plants that grow only in the hidden corners of these hills, plants that a powerful company, Viridia Corporation, wanted to own. Viridia Corporation, the name from the lawyer's letter, the ones with the standing offer. Suddenly the pieces began to shift, to rearrange themselves into a picture I didn't recognize. "They are a pharmaceutical giant," the letter continued. "They don't care about healing. They care about patents and profits. They discovered some of my work, my formulas for managing chronic pain, for calming anxieties, for things they could synthesize and sell for a fortune. They came to me first with offers of money. When I refused, they came with threats. They tried to buy the land out from under me. They filed lawsuits, claiming my practices were unsafe, that I was a danger. They were relentless, Ilara. And I was an old woman with no resources, fighting a dragon. I was losing. The fight was getting ugly. They began to watch me. They began to ask questions about you. A lovely 6-year-old girl, an orphan in my care, my only weakness. A cold dread washed over me, a horror that was ancient and deep. I wasn't the reason she'd let me go. I was the reason she'd fought so hard to keep me. I realized they would use you against me. They would threaten to have you taken away, to prove I was an unfit guardian, living in an unsafe environment, surrounded by unregulated substances. And they would have won. I would have lost you anyway, but I would have lost you into their hands, a pawn in their game. I couldn't let that happen. So I made a choice. I preempted them. I gave you to the state myself, creating a story of a great aunt unable to cope. I made myself the villain to save you from the monsters. I knew the system was flawed, that it would be hard for you, but I also knew it would keep you anonymous. It would hide you from Viridia until you were an adult, legally your own person, someone they couldn't use as leverage against me anymore. It was a desperate gamble. My only hope was that by the time you were 18, I would have won the fight, or at least found a way to make this place safe for you again. As you can see, I did not succeed. I let the pages fall into my lap. The room was spinning. I couldn't breathe. A sob, a raw, ragged sound, tore its way out of my chest. It was a sound I hadn't made in years. I had been so carefully, so meticulously numb. And now, this letter, this voice from the grave, had taken a hammer to the ice and shattered it into a million pieces. I cried. I cried for the little girl in the photograph, the one who lost her home and didn't know why. I cried for the teenager who built walls of anger to survive. I cried for the woman who had written these words, who had chosen a life of loneliness and heartbreak just to keep me safe. She hadn't abandoned me. She had protected me. It was the single most painful, most beautiful, most devastating realization of my life. The story I had told myself wasn't just a lie. It was the opposite of the truth. It was a shield she had given me, and I had mistaken it for a sword to use against her memory. I sat there in the dark, in the silent apartment, and wept until I had nothing left. The grief was a physical thing, a storm that wrecked me and then finally passed, leaving a strange, quiet calm in its wake. The anger was gone. The bitterness was gone. And in their place was a hollow ache of loss for a woman I now knew I had loved, and who had loved me fiercely in return. And something else was there too, a tiny, fragile seedling of something I couldn't name. It felt like purpose. Listen, if you've made it this far into my story, thank you. Maybe you've had a moment like this in your own life. A moment where the ground beneath your feet just gives way, where everything you believe to be true turns out to be a story someone else wrote. It's terrifying. It feels like you're falling. But sometimes, falling is the only way to find out you can fly. If you've ever had to rebuild your world from the ground up, let me know in the comments. You're not alone in this. This community is for all of us who have had to find our own truth. Now, let's get back to that dusty apartment. After the storm of tears had passed, I felt empty but clear. I picked up the letter and read the final lines. There is more I have to tell you, Ilara. More I have to show you. In the back of the workbench, in the storage room, there is a loose floorboard. Beneath it is everything you need to know. Everything you need to fight them, if you choose to. Because now, the choice is yours. The deed to this place is in your name. Viridia will come for you now. They will offer you money, a lot of money. Enough to start a new life, to forget Havenwood and this old apothecary forever. No one would blame you if you took it. But if you choose to stay, if you choose to take up this legacy, know that you will not be fighting for a building. You will be fighting for a way of life, for the people of this town, and for the memory of a woman who loved you more than life itself. The choice is yours. Be brave, my little bird. Your loving aunt, Isolde. The choice is yours. The words echoed in a silent room. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back on the desk. My hands were steady now. The fear was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was no longer in control. I stood up and walked back down the creaking stairs, my flashlight beam steady and sure. I went into the back room, the air thick with the smell of sleeping herbs. I found the workbench just as she described. Kneeling on the cold floor, I ran my hands along the floorboards behind it. One of them shifted slightly under my touch. My heart hammered against my ribs. I worked my fingers into the crack and lifted. The board came up with a soft groan. Beneath it was a hollow space, and inside that space was a large, oilskin-wrapped parcel. I lifted it out. It was heavy. I unwrapped it on the workbench, my flashlight illuminating the contents. It wasn't just one thing. It was an entire archive of Isolde's fight. There were thick journals, filled with her elegant script, detailing her formulas, her discoveries, the unique properties of the local plants. There were copies of every letter, every legal threat, every insulting offer Viridia had sent her. There were sworn affidavits from townspeople she had helped, testifying to the efficacy and safety of her remedies. There were photographs and hand-drawn maps of where her prized botanicals grew, hidden in the deep woods. And at the very bottom, in a separate sealed envelope, was a bundle of documents. It was scientific data, independent lab results she had commissioned, proving that her compounds were not only effective, but had fewer side effects than Viridia's synthetic equivalents. She had been building a case, a powerful one. She hadn't just been defending herself, she'd been preparing to go on the attack. She just ran out of time. I spent the rest of the night reading by flashlight, huddled under the Afghan from the armchair, absorbing the story of her quiet, courageous war. I learned about the people of Havenwood, people she wrote about with such compassion. A farmer whose wife suffered from debilitating migraines. A child with severe eczema that no doctor could cure. An old man whose grief after his wife's death had settled in his lungs. Isolde had helped them all. She hadn't been some reclusive witch. She had been the beating heart of this community. This apothecary wasn't just a shop. It was a sanctuary. The next morning, I walked to Mr. Abernathy's office. It was a small, tidy space above the hardware store. He was an older man with a kind, wrinkled face and sharp, intelligent eyes. He looked surprised to see me. "Miss Vance," he said, standing up to shake my hand. His grip was firm. "I'm glad you made it safely. Please, sit." I sat, but I didn't relax. "I'm not selling," I said. The words came out stronger than I expected. He raised his eyebrows. "Viridia's offer is substantial, life-changing for someone in your position. They've offered $2 million for the property and all its contents." $2 million. The number was so large it was meaningless. A year ago, a month ago, even yesterday morning, it would have been a miracle, an escape hatch from a life I hated. But it wasn't yesterday morning. I thought of the letter, of the journals, of the little girl in the photograph. "The contents are not for sale," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "And neither is the property." Mr. Abernathy studied me for a long moment. A slow smile spread across his face. "You're her grandniece, all right. Stubborn as a mountain mule." He leaned back in his chair. "She would be so proud of you. I was her lawyer, but I was also her friend. I knew she was trying to protect you. I'm glad you understand." "I have what she was collecting," I told him. "Evidence, journals, lab results." His eyes widened. "She never told me she had lab results." That changes things, Ilara. That changes everything." Just then, his phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID, and his expression tightened. "Speak of the devil," he muttered. He answered it, putting it on speaker. "Abernathy?" A crisp, cold voice filled the room. "Mr. Abernathy, this is Julian Croft from Viridia Corporation's legal department. We are calling to follow up on our offer for 117 Blackbird Lane. We need Miss Vance's decision. Our offer is final and expires in 48 hours. "My client is here with me now, Mr. Croft," Abernathy said, his voice smooth as stone. He winked at me. "Excellent," the voice said. "We trust she is making the sensible choice." I leaned forward. "This is Elara Vance," I said, my voice shaking only slightly. "The apothecary is not for sale. Not now, not ever. And I suggest you withdraw your offer and cease all contact, or my lawyer will be in touch regarding your company's history of harassment against my great-aunt." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the man's mind racing, recalibrating. The predator, realizing the prey had teeth. "That is an unwise position, Miss Vance," he said, his voice losing its corporate chill and taking on a sharper edge. "The only unwise position," Mr. Abernathy cut in, "is to continue threatening a young woman who is now in possession of some very illuminating documents. We will be in touch." He hung up the phone. The silence in his office was profound. He looked at me, his eyes shining. "Well done," he said softly. "The fight isn't over, not by a long shot. But you just won the first battle. I had made my choice. I was staying. I was going to fight." The days that followed were a blur of activity. Mr. Abernathy was true to his word. He filed a restraining order against Viridia for harassment and began preparing a larger case using Isolde's meticulous records. The legal battle would be long and expensive, but he helped me set up a trust with the small amount of money Isolde had left in a bank account, enough to pay the back taxes and keep the lights on for a while. The immediate threat subsided, replaced by the low hum of a war of attrition waged through legal letters and motions. They couldn't force me out, but they could try to bleed me dry. My own battle was quieter, fought with a broom and a bucket. I started with the apartment, airing it out, washing the linens, making it a space where I could live and breathe. Then I tackled the shop. The sheer amount of dust was overwhelming. I swept and scrubbed for days, the simple physical labor a balm for my still reeling mind. As the layers of grime came off, the apothecary began to reveal its true character. The wood of the counter was a rich, dark cherry, scarred with the marks of decades of work. The tin ceiling, once washed, gleamed with a soft, silvery light. I carefully took down every single bottle and jar, wiping them clean, their contents a mystery of roots, leaves, and petals. It was like learning a language, one letter at a time. Slowly, the town started to notice. The peeling green door was now propped open during the day, letting fresh air and sunlight spill into the long, dormant space. People would pause on the sidewalk, peering in. An older woman with a kind face, the owner of the bakery next door, was the first to speak to me. She brought over a loaf of warm bread and a small pot of jam. "I'm Mary," she said, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Your aunt was a wonderful woman. She helped my husband with his arthritis for years. The town hasn't been the same since she passed." She was the first of many. A man from the hardware store stopped by to help me fix a leaky pipe in the back room, telling me how Isolde had given him a salve that had cleared up a persistent rash on his hands when no doctor could. A young mother came in, her baby in a sling, and tearfully told me how an herbal tea from Isolde had saved her from debilitating postpartum depression. Each story was a piece of the puzzle, a testament to the woman I had never gotten to know. They weren't just customers, They were a community she had woven together with threads of kindness and care. They didn't see a dusty, worthless building. They saw the heart of their town, and they were relieved to see a light back on in the window. I spent my evenings in the apartment poring over Isolde's journals. It was like having her there with me, teaching me. Her handwriting became familiar, her voice clear in my head. I learned about the rhythms of the seasons, when to harvest, how to dry, the precise art of blending. It was overwhelming, a lifetime of knowledge packed into a dozen thick books. I started small. I found her recipes for simple things, a calming chamomile lavender tea, a peppermint salve for headaches, a honey and thyme syrup for coughs. I began to experiment, following her instructions to the letter. My first attempts were clumsy, but I was persistent. The scent of herbs began to cling to my clothes and my hair. I felt like I was slowly, painstakingly, becoming a part of the place. I wasn't just its owner, I was becoming its student. I was no longer a ghost haunting a tomb. I was a caretaker, tending to a sleeping garden. Months passed. The autumn fog gave way to the quiet blanket of winter snow. Viridia's lawyers continued their paper assault, but with Mr. Abernathy's help, we held them at bay. The fight was far from over, but it had become a part of my daily life, a distant thunder that I was learning to live with. The apothecary was clean now, organized. I had started a small fire in the pot-bellied stove, and its warmth filled the shop, a cheerful, living presence against the cold. I hadn't officially opened for business. I wasn't ready for that, but the townspeople didn't seem to care. They would stop in for a cup of tea, to share a story, to ask for a bit of the headache salve I had learned to make. I never charged them. It didn't feel right. This was their place as much as it was mine. One afternoon, as a light snow was falling outside, Mary from the bakery came in, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "Elara, dear," she said, "my little grandson has a terrible cough, and nothing seems to be helping him sleep." I looked at her worried face, and without a second thought, I went to the shelves. I measured out thyme and mullein and licorice root into a small brown paper bag, just as I'd read in Isolde's journal. I folded it carefully and handed it to her, explaining how to brew the tea. She took the bag, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have your aunt's hands." After she left, I stood by the window, watching the snowflakes drift down and cover the street in a layer of pristine white. I thought about the girl who had stepped off the bus here, a ghost full of anger and emptiness. She felt like a stranger to me now. I had arrived with nothing but a key and a lie I'd been told about my life. I had been so sure that what I wanted, what I needed, was an escape, money, a clean break. But I was wrong. What I had needed was this, a connection, a purpose, a home. Isolde's inheritance wasn't the building, or the debt, or even the fight against Viridia. Her inheritance was a choice. The choice to turn a place of abandonment into a place of belonging. The choice to stop being a victim of my past and start being the author of my future. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. The legal battle loomed. I had years of learning ahead of me. I was lonely sometimes, the weight of the legacy heavy on my shoulders. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't adrift. I had roots. They were tangled in the rich soil of this small town, in the history of this strange and wonderful shop, and in the love of a woman who had reached across death to save me. I picked up the heavy marble pestle from the counter, its surface cool and smooth against my palm. In the mortar was a handful of dried lavender buds. I began to grind them, the steady, rhythmic motion a kind of prayer. The air filled with the clean, calming scent. The cycle was continuing. A new chapter was beginning, and I was ready to write it. So much of life is about the stories we tell ourselves. For 12 years, my story was that I was unwanted, that I was thrown away, and that story shaped every choice I made, every wall I built. Finding out the truth didn't just change my past, it unlocked my future. It taught me that inheritance isn't about what you're given, it's about what you choose to do with it. It's about picking up the broken pieces and building something new. My aunt gave me a key to a dusty old shop, but what she really gave me was a key to myself. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to rewrite the narrative of your own life, please hit that like button. It helps more than you know. And I really want you to subscribe, because this channel is a place for stories like this. It's a community for people who understand that sometimes the hardest journeys lead to the most beautiful destinations. I read every single comment, and I want to hear from you. What's a story you used to tell yourself that you learned was untrue? Share it below. Your story matters. You matter. Thank you for listening.